Well, it was bound to roll around eventually. It's April 1st, 2025. And I know for the family of Ed Pisker, this April 1st, this April Fool's Day will never be the same again. And I know for myself, as well as many of those who witnessed and experienced a tragic event publicized last year. For them, it will also, the day will never be the same again. You can discuss degrees of how things affect people one to another. Some were barely grazed, some were devastated, some were shocked, some were outraged, some were angered, some doubled down, some mocked, some ridiculed, some spread, some started bonfires of, scandal. But I think even many of them were shocked to find out what would take place. Shocked to find out what the decision Ed Pisker would make. As many of you know already, and some of you that may be curious, Ed Pisker took his life on this day last year. Now, ultimately, that event is the saddest part of this story. But before we reach that point, before he reached that point in actuality, there were many other sad things going on within the online community on YouTube, for example, all through the internet, really, the back and forths, things that would continue to go on even after his death. Disturbing things. And in the aftermath, many people in the community who had channels would come out to be supportive and just reflect on Ed's life. Where others ran under the mat and hid with the dust bunnies because they knew, or they certainly seemed to show signs that they felt partially responsible, and they know it. They felt it. And anything they could do to forget it, well, some of us are not forgetting those things. And what I want to be clear on right now is that the point of this video isn't really to remind everybody of a terrible event, and can't we just, because there will be some people, can we just give it a rest? And, just, I want, as Chris from Comic Tropes had once said, I just want this pain to stop. And, quite right. He went on to be supportive and help generate positive energy, and direct that towards Ed's family, and that is something I'm sure they appreciated. Um, for some of you who aren't familiar, uh, Ed Pisker was a cartoon artist that produced works such as Hip Hop Family Tree, Red Room, and last year he was working on his latest project, uh, Switchblade Shorties. Um, he also had a YouTube channel, and it's still here on YouTube, which he and his I don't know, co-host, partner, friend, Jim Rugg, hosted. Man, talk about a lot of content. This was something new and refreshing for me. I had discovered them just at the end of 2022, I'd say, going into 2023. And the thing that was different about this enthusiasm is it was generating an attitude towards, talking shop. But when I say talking shop, I'm not really talking about like an instructional session. This is how you do this. This is, what is the technique behind these panels. It was more looking at other craftsmen's work, both in the past and present, and talking about or talking about the history of the personalities, the clashes, getting right into it. And when it came to technique and stuff, they would look at something and say, I wonder how he did this. Look at these color stops. Look at the use of black in these panels. Wow. How did they come to this idea, this sort of thing? And it was so refreshing. Because these were things, as an artist, myself, and I'm sure many of the community were seeing and asking themselves all along during their journey as becoming artists, really. And so this was really refreshing. But it was constant like that, saying things that no one was really saying, not really controversial things, I wouldn't say that, just that, they were asking the proper questions. That was the main thing, asking the proper questions. Not the run-of-the-mill fanboy stuff. And I don't want to use that word fanboy in a derogatory sense, because most of us are, to a certain degree or another. We have our mentors, and we have our childhood stories, etc., etc. But no, the thing was that towards the last couple of years, when you look at some of the interviews they were getting with some of the greats, and I don't want to list them, there's too many, but most of those people being interviewed, both in the trade or in past, involvement, they seem to really appreciate those two guys and their show and their questions. It was refreshing to them. It wasn't dumbed down. They appreciated the smartness of the inquiries, put it that way. And it led to some great interviews. Like I'll just use an example. You compare, for example, Ralph Bakshi's interview with the boys, right? Compared to any other. Like, I mean, there's a few of them here on YouTube. You compare them. And you see what I mean? Like, you could see Bakshi, once he found that the guys were asking questions that were questions that most people didn't ask about things like, your budget when you're taking on a project, time, his interactions with certain artists. And they just, and when the person being interviewed, this case Bakshi, was being interviewed, they just let him go because they knew they got to the point where he was like, oh, this is triggering something that within me that I really want to say about the industry and about timing and what about the passion. And you get interviews where guys would start tapping into what their influences were, some of their references, what they were seeing coming up, you know, all these things that went into making them who they were as artists. And I think the word must have got around with various artists that, this was the interview you wanted to pull off. And it just seems such a tragedy that, there was that and, other things that were up and coming in the life of Ed Pisker. He was starting to do art shows and stuff, which sounded kind of exciting. Probably not everyone's cup of tea, but whatever. You want to do that, put stuff on the wall. I mean, I think this is the time of it, because a lot of this stuff, I dare say, may be becoming obsolete. I'm talking about hands-on pencil, pen, and ink on the board. I'm talking about endless hours of completing panels and pouring your heart into your work. I mean, the stuff doesn't come easy. And that was one of the other things that Ed had come to realize, that it was about your body of work, what you were going to actually get done on the board, and a little less blah blah, right? And this was something that most people with, as they would say, had skin in the game would understand. And it was funny how a lot of his detractors weren't really that, or they were barely on the scene, and not too good, I might add. But there was something else to be noted. And that thing was that if you listen to other interviews with them or other outside of them, you would see that underlying there was that element of reality that discussed hard work and trying to get ahead, making a buck, making a living for some, that it was work. It wasn't just all about, Aunt Sally. I've used this term before, Aunt Sally providing you with markers and scribble pads and say, keep up the good work, John. That stuff, that's great and wonderful, but, some enthusiasts, they go their whole, artists, enthusiasts, go their whole life like that, where they don't take on challenges. They don't want to hear any negative criticism, especially now more than ever. But these guys weren't about that. They pushed through. They had to learn things. They were still learning things, and that was the beauty of it. You could tell. Every once in a while, you could tell what level either young man was at, where they would say, well, I'm starting to struggle with this and this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? This has been touched on before, where you're going to get a lot further ahead when you start asking your questions about your art and saying, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Never mind the praise and the pats on the back, gee, keep up the good work, Johnny, and all that bullshit. That isn't going to... But they were on to the other level. They were producing things, they were publishing things, and that's, I think that inspired a lot of novices and enthusiasts like myself, and who never really took the time to apply. Oh yeah, sure, there were commissions and selling paintings, and got my first job working for it was a craft supply and distributing shop, little knickknacks and stuff, figurines and decorative stuff, little drawings. I think it was ridiculous. I think I was getting to start in when I was 19 anyway. It was like, 200, or 200, yeah, right. It sounds like so much more when you say it that way. It's like $2.50 per shot, Each drawing was like $2.50. Not $250. I'm talking about $2.50. So you'd have to ring off a bunch of those, to make any kind of money at the time. I got that through my art teacher back in the day, but that wasn't going to last. I mean, I was also working a part-time job, and then I started working a full-time job in the trades. But anyway, that was a decision me and my wife were kind of making. I think it was bad advice overall when I look at it, but I think we both agreed at that time. It's like, we were married and we had a son coming, and it was like it was more practical. Stick with the trades while trying to earn a living. Everyone's story and situation is different, but that's what happened. But I'm not going to blame any lack of success or any lack of initiative on that. Actually, when you start rolling out the blame carpet, it doesn't get you very far. But anyway, I think there were probably a lot of people just like me who had gone on to do various things like that, when they caught wind of what was happening around the cartoonist kayfabe campfire, it was refreshing. It was something new to see. But it wouldn't last, it turned out. I remember a few days in the last week of March. I was walking down the street. Sun had gone down. It was quite dark, actually, and I was headed towards a couple of stores to pick up a few things before calling it a night. And I was listening to music and videos and stuff on my walk over. And I remember, I don't know if some of you are familiar, there was a documentary, of course, most of you be like, of course we know. But it was called, there was a documentary called Comic Book Confidential. And one of the tracks in that documentary was called Fun Time by Joe Cocker. And it was booming around in my head, and it reminded me of the documentary. And I was in a pretty good mood because I was, I don't know, again, suddenly, enthusiastic about the craft and the energy from, a history and memory of all this comic book and art enthusiasm. And I don't know, I was listening to it on YouTube, and I just put in the comment section something like dedicated to the boys at Cartoonist Kayfabe, sort of like a little shout out, just like, I was feeling just so enthusiastic, filled up with episode after episode of all this passion and, positive energy concerning a love of something that perhaps I had let sit dormant for a while. And I remember digging into my works later then, going, look at all this stuff that's incomplete. What happened? And I started reflecting. But that's a personal story too, not that I'm not willing to discuss certain things. But the thing is, this isn't about that. Well, it was shortly after that. How short, I can't tell. Maybe a couple of days. Within a couple of days, I had heard the green turd that was heard about the green turd that was floating around concerning Ed Pisker. Allegations of child molestation, allegations of inappropriate, propositions or things like this, and then, oh no, you can't be serious, right? But I don't know if it's because of my age or not, but for some reason, I didn't right away jump on the bandwagon. I just started floating around different channels to find out what the hell what was going on. Of course, it was a little bit silent from Cartoonist Kayfabe, as you may imagine. you know, there were many things that I was concerned with. I didn't have the facts. This was before everyone had a chance to consider the DMs. All of that. It was happening so fast. You know, the first part of the bad news, you know, and it just goes to show how human we are and how quickly we can make decisions about what something means or about what's happening. I mean, the most disturbing thing that I heard right away was someone who had reported, I didn't know if this was true or not, but that Jim Rugg was basically announcing that he'd be separating himself from Ed Piskor and their work. I don't know. You know, it seemed very practical, something you'd want to do to preserve your own career and stuff. But, you know, just hearing that sort of thing, it was starting to fuel an anger and resentment, because I was feeling frustrated because I didn't, you know, I didn't have like I said, I didn't have the facts. I didn't hear what was really being said and stuff. And for all I knew, that someone was making this up, and I didn't know what to think. But on the other hand, understood how a person might feel like they're in that position. But I was wondering, why aren't they fighting this? Why aren't they fighting this? And the thing is, I remember the aftermath where you got a chance to examine everything. Ed's letter was one thing, but even if you examine the most toxic and incriminating DMs and the quotes, the worst of it, even if you were to consider, you heard the phrase, believe women, even if you do that, there was nothing there to suggest guilt. There was so much room for reasonable doubt. It's not funny. And before touching upon that, understand this. It was balled up, rolled out of the way in a heated stream of hatred that was coming at Ed Piskor. And before anyone really had the chance to look things over, Ed Piskor took his own life. And that is the part that was most troubling. It wasn't just about a fatal decision Ed had made. It was about the decision to act that way isn't exactly what it's all about. It was also about, within that decision, what led Ed to do that. It might not be what people had thought. And even if it were, still, when you look at the actual proposals of guilt within this story, didn't really do much. Nothing took place. At best, there was a suggestion of a suspicion which overrode this whole occurrence. For about 2 weeks, I remember thinking, this can't be true, this can't be true. Perhaps it was like a stunt, like someone's pulling. Oh, look, it's April Fool's. Yeah, I get it. Ha ha. But of course it was real, as a heart attack. I can't express the the profound way this affected me personally, and I won't. But there was a relation there in spirit that I saw through Ed that showed me two things. Huge things. That the spirit and passion and love for this trade among the swordsmen that are going for it, that are trying to improve all the time, learning, developing, pounding it out on the board, that was alive and well, even in this fucked up time. A time where people can't even properly process information. They can't even reason. You accuse them of doing such, investigation that is so full of folly and full of holes. You point it right out to them and say, where's your logic? Where's your reason? How can you come to these conclusions? And they still don't get it. I mean, there is a portion of the population, it's just like, are these even people? You very quickly realize that half of the controversies they're putting up on their YouTube channels is just to generate controversy, to keep the I'm so clever, right? Don't tell me, right? They don't even care about what they're talking about half of the time. It's just the latest buzz. Now, a part of me wants to say there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, yeah, of course, you want to target the thing that you're going to get the most hits on and all that stuff. Personally, me, I don't go that route, obviously. I put things up there that I like, and, with the idea in mind that since some of the things may be rare, as far as readings go, or, a portion of interest that isn't getting a lot of play, that's kind of the point. Someone types in something on their search bar and this comes up. That's the idea. But anyway, it's not, I'm not, how a person runs their channel is one thing, but oh my God, talk about disgusting. These people would get up there and rant and rave as if the jury was in on this guy. And after he took his life, they did this big downshift now. Now they're to play the remorseful figure and start pointing the finger at others. Okay? And some of them were just plain evil and doubled down. Personally, without getting personal, it seemed to me that there were a handful of people out there that got their nose out of joint as Ed was going in a certain direction. Now, it's not enough for me to sit here and say that little things were happening for Ed, leading to a bigger picture, perhaps, making his way around the scene. And this all just comes down to jealousy and envy and resentment. I won't say that, because there's usually more to this. And in fact, I know there was. I know that just from listening to the show that Ed was a little bit loose with his lips. I'm not going to condone or condemn him for it, but he would just, when it came to detractors, he'd just throw out arrows and say, this is coming from a lot of people who don't have any fucking skin in the game, which he was right about, and they're just blah, 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 and all that. And he wasn't saying, oh, you're jealous, but he would say things like that. But he would also be open about his sexuality to a certain degree, that he was heterosexual, and that he'd say things on the program like, sometimes I have girls over, so I have to do this or do that. I don't know if I can't remember if it had something to do with tidying up or something or whatever. But the thing is, he kind of struck me like, he struck me as beneath it all, he was just a regular guy, you know? His subject matter in his comics, that's another story. The Red Room thing, I think I got that too. I mean, after the Walking Dead series and the television thing, where do you go with that kind of thing? I mean, I grew up in the 80s where Night of the Living Dead was, and John and Romero and all. That was a big deal. That was a lot of fun stuff. But after The Walking Dead, where do you go with that? It's like, all right, I get it. Zombies, yeah, hack them up, chew them up. Where you go? It seemed like the next logical step. I don't know if people saw that extremity, or they saw the extremity, but the direction of that, I kind of got it. Wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I'm going to tell you something straight off the bat. When it came to Ed and Jim, I would buy their products when I can, and when I could, to be supportive. Supportive why? Because, well, I can tell you that some of the things I was very much interested in, some of the things I was not. But I'd buy them anyway to be supportive of what they were giving back to the community intellectually, stimulating the conversations, etc., etc. But anyway, there was a lot of things going on, and it looked like it might have been a new chapter. But that would get snuffed out by, I can only guess about these things, but it sounds like there was some disrespect on Ed's part towards some of his affiliates or some of the people he had associated with, both past and present, who kind of, they'd hang on, they were hanging out there, but they were kind of brushed aside or brushed off. Some have surmised that some of them thought they could get somewhere by hanging out with Ed, which isn't that necessarily, has nothing, not necessarily a relationship that would have to lead towards sex or anything. I think anyone wanting to develop or climb the ladder in any field they're in want to talk some shop with some of the people that are on their way or whatever. I'm not going to get into that because everyone's different. But I think it's quite possible by some of the things that Ed was saying that some of the ladies, girls, etc., what have you, and there weren't many. I don't think Ed was by any means a ladies' man, and some assholes actually got on the point to start talking about him being, so creepy and all that. I guess the glasses and stuff because of his shyness. It was kind of funny, in a sense. You could tell there was something up there, but it all turned out that just, Ed was a little bit, he'd get intimidated a bit. With all that time in the board, they'd also criticize that no one should spend that much time devoted to one thing. There are other things in life, and everyone had all their armchair psychoanalyses and write-ups and summaries of what they thought was going on and who they thought Ed was and all that stuff. So there you had it, And apparently some felt that Ed was being dismissive with them. Like, you're so ambitious, go, basically showing them to the door or showing them a number. Here, call my agent, see if you can get somewhere with him there. Like, he would, listen, people. Every once in a while, I think we need to be reminded that with all this geared up energy towards politeness, which is often insincere, and if this fiasco didn't teach us that, the way people changed face after Ed died, I don't think, if that's not a good enough example for people to learn from, it's hopeless. And I think that's one of the... None of us has an obligation to go around kissing everyone else's ass. And we shouldn't have to do that for fear that they might go online behind our back. Fucking, you know what? Behind their back, behind your back, behind my back, you know what, people? Behind our backs, that's where we shit. And that's where we should just let it rip. Because that's where those people are. They huddle in corners amongst themselves behind your back. There's no character there. It's worldwide now. Well, excuse me, but as far as I'm concerned, I thought it always was. That's how I've lived my life in the last, what the fuck? You're nothing in that regard. I mean, enjoy it, because it's probably the deepest pleasure people like you will get. And I look at the tragedy of Ed's death, and right? I mean, there was that, many people, I mean, even the ones who intended a good message were coming across saying, I don't think suicide is the answer and all that. Well, certainly no one wants to endorse that. And there are guidelines that want to veer away from that. But when you start making judgments based on that, on another person, and you're trying to use your own example, I don't think it has the wings people would like to. I mean, I would just say this, that when it comes to character and doing things like that, there are different reasons for doing. There's weakness, there's strength, but the strength part isn't what people talk about. I think about the ancient Romans, feudal Japan. I think about a Luger tucked in the drawer of a German officer. Or, there is this thing beyond, our capacity to endure that may lead to these decisions. I don't want to get into it because I don't, personally, to round this off and to be sure and to make myself clear as a disclaimer, I don't think Ed Pisker made the right decision. But not for the reasons I was hearing about 11 months ago, from people talking about it. I don't think he should have done this. I don't think anyone should, making that overall, overreaching, monumental assertion that should never happen. And in a way, the case of Ed Pisker should have never happened. It's true, but I won't go as far as to say that anyone has any right to intruding upon the decision Ed made. You know what I mean? I can tell you, I don't think he should have. So that's kind of like a contradiction, but the reason is different. I think, usually when these kind of things happen, what do we think of? Oh, he must have been guilty. That's why. Fucking people, so simple-minded. A lot of cases that's true, I'm sure. I don't doubt that for a minute. But I looked at this case and I saw other possibilities. It's kind of in his note, and I'm not going to point people in that direction, but it goes something like this. He said, many people have been, I'm paraphrasing, have been supportive and, trying to tell me to hang in there, but I'm just not that strong. That's what he said. And the thing is, within those few days as he was getting bombarded, I mean, the local news people, can you imagine emotionally what that must have done to him? That within those, 72 hours or whatever, what it was doing. You can't, I imagine you start to become irrational. You start to become, well, in this case, he probably just felt an immense sense of despair without thinking things through. How could he? How could he? He wasn't on the outside, he was on the inside. He was the target. And I feel, as I examine this and I run it over in my mind again and again, that sense of that young man's lonely, not so young, but whatever. Oh God, young at heart. Sense of his lonely departure. Ed came from some pretty humble beginnings and stuff, and he was no stranger to rough times or knowing characters of rough living, and there are probably some stories in there that most people in those situations, I know oh, I've got some stories to tell. But that's not the point here. But in the end, I just felt that Ed just gathered up what he knew about the community and the dynamics of how, how people got on socially in this network, mentioning things such as the Whisper network and all this stuff where people are, taking people down. The biggest thing that came out and just drowned it was, Neil Gaiman's the attacks on Neil Gaiman this past year, where I don't even give a damn. I don't care. I mean, it is strange, though. I mean, you have a different kind of character who sees, like, what is it with the comic book community and the sci-fi? Like, what is with these? Okay, look, I know it's kind of like geek culture and all that. I get that. I'm part of it. Like, you understand that. We understand that to a certain degree. But what I never understood about some of these fucking geeks is their general and utter jitters around the topic of sex of any sort. I mean, there's no reason to be vulgar, but I see them jitter and run for the door or start giggling or ignoring or trying to separate themselves from anything anyone said sexually. Like, it's just weird. It is not normal. You're not virtuous. And you're going around trying to control your speech and every suggestion you make, and, you're playing by rules of hypocrites. Basically. A lot of these closet case fucking nuts. Well, I'll tell you, when I first heard the story, it didn't hit me the same way. And when I say the same way, I'm bashing through the variants, because in one way, both the supporters and detractors, if you took a lump of them in your hand and threw them down on the table, you couldn't sort them out in a certain regard. They had something in common. They were missing the fucking point of why this was such a tragedy. Why go on about it? Ed's gone. Can't bring him back. Ed's gone. Right? But the point was how it went down and how people jumped to conclusions. There were people that were so convinced they were right, they weren't even examining the evidence and just accepting things and then going on to spread it. That's what was most upsetting about it. And, of course, in the aftermath, the 2 weeks that followed, people had time to examine it, but they were still off their fucking nut about it. Here's the thing. I remember expressing distress about this in the comics section. Who am I? I'm nobody. But one of the first negative reactions I got was this. Listen to this now. This was just days after. You understand? And the young lady said, "What are you trying to do? Go out there and try to defend child molesters?" And I didn't know how to take this. And I'm like, I had to write back, and I said, "No." Paraphrasing, "You idiot. I'm saying we don't even know what's happened, and you're on this bandwagon. You're so convinced of everything. We haven't even looked at it." I don't even know, actually, at that time, if I had time to examine everything. In fact, I'm not even sure I had even read the suicide note. If you can even say that word, right? But, yeah, I'm not even sure about that. But I was saying, like, I was like, you have no right to use that word into the jury's in. Like, you're spreading these things and you don't even know. You haven't even checked. And there was more and more and more evidence of people making up their minds, and you'd examine what they'd say and you realize they don't know what's happened at all. Most of them are on a bandwagon. And of course the shit talkers who were strumming it up for their channels, they shifted gears and went the opposite direction because it was equally lucrative, I suppose. It was just disgusting. I mean, who do these fucking people think they are? Here, I'm going on about this too much, but what it really comes down to was things that were experienced in the comment section. Now, even when Chris, God bless his heart, even when he went up there and he expressed his remorse, he knew Ed, interviewed Ed and knew Jim and knew what was going on there. He felt it. There's no denying. I was still filled with rage over the whole thing. I was so upset. I felt like something was ripped out of me. And I didn't even know these young men. But Chris was saying, he was getting more to the point. His point was that he just wanted the pain to stop. And I understood that as an emotional consideration. But even that made me angry. And I'm sorry for saying this, Chris, but I was like, yes, of course. That's not only one of the primary directives, but it should be something that, shouldn't be overlooked. That it's also a virtue. But as hard as it is, I think sometimes we have to overlook emotions and virtue. No one will be able to overlook or should even try to overlook the pain that was suffered by people that knew and loved Ed. Okay? Especially the family. And I, with all due respect to the PISKER family, please understand where I'm going with this. I want people to realize that potentially Ed didn't have to die in vain. And how that is achieved is, I think, by looking at some things. Like, think about that irrational comment. What are you trying to do? Protect these sex offenders or whatever now? You think you're being some sort of hero? I was asked, And I was like, no! This is about you not even knowing what's going on and a decision was made. A witch burning got someone killed. Now, it was very difficult because Ed had taken his own life. But that's just the thing. I think Ed understood such commenters like that. Such an environment like that no one was going to listen. And they're still not. But here's the other thing that was brought up. Someone said, again, paraphrasing, I don't use their handles because I don't want to smear them. All right? If you don't like something, then you don't do it. Okay? But he said, I don't understand this negative reaction you're giving. I think it was obvious in the DMs what had taken place. And he went on to say, it seems he was on the trail of an underage girl. Someone blew the whistle. And what did he say? The game ended. That was another comment. But that's the thing. I remember being blown away by this and going, okay, here we go again. Obviously, this person hasn't looked into it. That's not what happened at all. And I didn't, the question that came up was, buddy, do you even realize that the accusation you're talking about, this so-called evidence, this point of reference, Yeah, clearly. This person had no idea what they're talking about. It's what floats around, the turds that float around as things are, flowing into the gutter, that people are picking on. Flies zipping around from one turd to another. They're not really investigating. Which leads to another point. Another person came up from behind and said, "Oh, well, I too." He thought he was being funny. This humorous old loser. He said, "Well, I too don't believe in the idea of just believing, taking everyone for their word, believing women." And then he went into other things, or believing men for that reason, or believing dogs, or cats, or, whatever. And I said, what about kids in electrical appliances? Like, I was like just saying, you're being gross now, right? But that's the other edge. Okay, think about this. There's the other concept, right? Oh my God, I remember when things started to turn around. About 15 years ago, where girls were coming forth and being more open about some of the abuse they had experienced and stuff, and the Me Too movement was starting to create out of that. But it didn't take a genius to see that got out of hand too. But people are so affected by the stories emotionally that they stop investigating. They're just too busy being outraged, too busy trying to separate themselves, for whatever reasons, whether it's financial or social. They try to separate themselves from the person being accused or whatever. But in this case, the guy was saying, I don't think it's a good policy to just go along believing everybody. But here's the ironic thing about it. If you were to believe what those people said, their words they used, what kind of picture do you actually get? I'll tell you. And sometimes it would suggest, but it's not clear, that Ed was being downright disrespectful. But here's the clincher. Here's the clincher. Right? I was questioning, like, really, if you look at all the DMs, I think it's obvious. What was it? Really, you do you? Did you actually read them? Do you know when things happened, when they didn't? It was 2020 when the most damning, so-called damning, which led to the tragedy, was launched. And even if you take that most damning, the most severe, the one that everyone pounces on, involving a 17-year-old young lady at that time, in 2020, there's nothing there. There's nothing there incriminating. The most you get is the suggestion that comes out of what? Fart wind? Out of thin air? What are you talking about? There was an offer made after they had talk shop. The whole naughty girl thing and stuff like that had to do with prying. And I'm not saying she was trying to find out secrets, but Ed was trying to say that there are things he didn't want to discuss about his up-and-coming project. It hadn't been released to the public by then. And talking to her, he was saying, you're not a snitch, are you? You're not going to, right? And he didn't want to talk about those things. That, of course, using those words in conjunction. And I've seen this kind of thing before where they put two things together in conjunction, one with the other. One has nothing to do with the other, but you put them together and it's this dynamic hybrid of incriminating evidence. But it's not. So there was that. The other thing was, as an enthusiast of line art, Ed basically had said, look, if you're in the Pittsburgh area and you need a place to crash, right, there's a room here for you, that kind of thing, right? But that's all there was to it. I mean, it wasn't a pursuit. It wasn't ongoing. It's not like he was pursuing her and he got caught or anything. It was that, and then it was dismissed. You know, I'm sure a lot of people on the way to other people's, climbing up the ladder of career, big or small, whatever avenue, everything's relative, that some people are dismissed socially, or they break off contact, or, you just, especially when you're talking about work. With Ed, the thing was, even in maintaining the channel and doing occasional trips here and there, this was all planned stuff. Most of the time, he wanted to spend on that board, creating, on that board, producing more and more work. And I just don't think that people that don't live that way can ever really fully understand that. They don't have time for your bullshit. You know? Oh. I remember I was dating a girl back in mid-90s. She was quite intelligent, too. I mean, when we were taking our OACs, man, she would pull off an essay overnight. And the teacher would give her 99% because giving 100%, no one gets 100% right, but he didn't know what to, I'd struggle with something for weeks and get an 82, you know what I mean? She was, but just not practical anyway, kind of flighty. Emotions dominated her life. Addictions and fetishes and whatever. Just held her down. But she said something really smart to me once. She said there's a proverb. It goes something like this. She said there are intelligent people, there are smart people, and then there are the dumb people. And she said, intelligent people, they talk about ideas, concepts, understanding, things that you would find in higher forms of ethical investigations or religions or philosophies or political science, etc., etc. And she said, and then there are the smart people. They talk about events, things that are happening, the news of the day, geopolitics, trends, what's happening locally. She said, and then there's the stupid people. You know what they talk about? And I said, no, what? And she said, each other. Well, that was a long time ago. Damn near 30 years ago, and I've had a lot of time and experience to think that one away. Anyway, I don't want to get philosophical about it. It's just that this whole thing made me sick to my stomach. And it started making me realize why Ed would make such a decision. And even I contributed to it for a bit. Truth is, I was doing a little bit of bantering back and forth, opinions in the comment section. See, people never realize that you can never know who's reading what. But there were times that comments would come up from Ed that I felt like was touching upon something I addressed in a comment thing. And we're going back and forth in this and that. And what I had said while he was alive, when I had heard about these things, I hadn't learned everything. But even that, I said, well, that was stupid. That was stupid. But when I said, like I was saying, Ed, that was stupid, making that offer, right? But I wasn't saying it as a point of guilt. I was saying, you just slipped in some shit here, possibly. But I didn't see it as leading to a tragedy. I regret saying that because because later when I think about it, who knows the impact something said can have on an individual. And just how strong or weak Ed was, I don't really know. But I think he was up to his neck in people's bullshit coming up, and he knew how these things went. And he didn't, I think he decided it wouldn't be worth fighting for. He's just going to make his exit. No one's going to listen. It's going to hang over his head for the rest of his life. And he's right. He's right. But what disturbed me the most was how people just went on to not investigate. Again, the most damning, incriminating portion of the evidence was an offer for this girl to come and stay in Pittsburgh, in a room where Ed lived, if she's ever in Pittsburgh. But that's how things were, you know. I mean, you go on road trips and stuff with your buddies or whatever in a car. But since it was now, I don't think she attacked him with this offer. I think it was used by some other, I was going to say ladies, but whatever, disgruntled fucknuts that thought they could kind of wrestle Ed into a compromising position where they felt that they were in control. And I think some of them, not all, had their noses bent out of joint when they found out that their experience with him wasn't unique to just them, that he had other young ladies in his history. Like I said, I don't see Ed as a ladies' man, but I see it. This comes from a reoccurring pattern that I've seen abroad in the workplace, where I've seen guys actually lose their jobs for this shit. Flirting goes on, it's fine, it's well and good, it's all a funny joke. Flirts with someone else, that's when the shit hits the fan. That's not justice, folks. That is two things. One, it's in a way kind of ethically disgusting to do that to someone. And, you know, morally disgusting. This had nothing to do with what was right or wrong. It just had to do with petty jealousies and partial vanity. But meanwhile, there are real sexual abuse victims out there suffering from this crap, from animals that people aren't talking about. People are fear because it doesn't fall into the designated speech lexicon of words that you can use and can't. It's so people are so full of shit. And I'm sorry, but some of the people in the community are some of the most disgusting things that hang out in corners. And one of the things I've noticed about the weaker sex in these communities is that there are constantly, as part of their particular, carnal ritual, trying to break down men and cut them down to size. Always looking for serious weaknesses. Until basically they have a spider in the corner balling up a fly. Like, you know, these things that happen to young men and women when they're children, these things are no joke. And you don't, I'm not the guy to be asked what to do with these monsters that destroy lives. It's unlawful, and I wouldn't want to say anything to incriminate myself, what I think should be done. I'll just put it this way. There was a time, even within 100 years, where these things were taken care of. These things were taken care of. Let's put it that way. And not just in a courtroom. They were dealt with. But that's not neither here nor there. The thing is, there's another element of this destructive, evil behavior that leaves a trace of itself. A lot of these victims are quite fragile emotionally. Never mind what you sense on the exterior or how they get along. But the seed of evil seeps into their psyche and they start becoming the abuser. And a lot of those individuals will not listen to reason once the witch burning, I was going to say the F word, are lit. When the witch burning kindling, that's a better word for it, are lit. They can't hear anything. They're out to attack and punish some ghost from their past emotionally through this transaction. They become irrational, basically. And I'm not talking about everyone who's experienced abuse in their family or with themselves or whatever. I'm saying I know about this element. And it's disastrous. They sit out there in communities like little landmines. Are they bad people? No. But their vicious social attacks are not kept in check. They are not held responsible. And afterwards, I think some of them even doubled down despite consequences. If not because they thought they were right, but because they wanted to save face. They'll never face the guilt or the idea that what they did or said led to the demise of another out of total despair. Right? I didn't mean for this to be such a long rant, but a lot of my stuff turns out that way. My apologies. But let's look at that most damning. I want you to think about something now. Someone's life or death. Let's create this scenario. Someone's life is on the line here. Now, the most damning of the DMs. Let's look at this. He offered a place for the young lady to stay if she would be in Pittsburgh. Okay. First of all, let's get the facts. Don't tell me these things don't matter legally. It's not true. I want to present it as clearly as I can, as simply as I can. She was 17 years old. Okay? If anyone would feel this was inappropriate to the nth degree, it should be her parents. Okay. 17, yeah, look. Okay, so I think people were inclined to believe that unless she was 18, she couldn't engage in sexual act. What planet are people living on? This is the ridiculousness of it. First of all, when do you think people are, say, young people are losing their virginity? You know, at what age? And if they're losing it to someone their own age, that's a better case scenario, I would think. But is it any less a tragedy? What I'm saying is, fathers of daughters that are engaging in this kind of thing should be, would be, could have been in the past concerned with these. What are we talking about here? It's quite obvious the attack was against Ed for just being creepy. Okay, but she's 17. Now that's back in 2020. Right? But by the time this message about offering someone a place to stay comes by, it's 4 years later. Well, less than 4 years. What are you talking about? Now, first of all, I mentioned that people were under the impression that 18 was the legal age. Well, secondly, here's the point. No, wrong. Not in Pittsburgh. 17 years old. It's far too young or too old, depending on how you look at it. I don't know what people are smoking, really. They're not being reasonable. But anyway, that's not a good mix anyway. A relationship like that. Even if she were 18, it wouldn't be. And I think even if she was of legal age, 18, I think the people would still have a problem with it. And you know that's true, especially the women that created the wave. Okay? And there'd be all sorts of underlying reasons why. Even some of the cuck males out there that are going around trying to win brownie points from these psychotic cunts. Anyway. Who, me? Angry? No. Look. So, you can take the underage thing and throw it out the window, okay? Legally speaking, as far as being a good thing to do ethically, absolutely not. Talk about problematic. Oh my God, what a headache not to boot, you know? But there's that. So, in offering someone this place to stay, what do we have here? At the very worst, we have a suggestion. A nudge, nudge. Come and stay at my place, baby. Yeah. Yeah, Ed was macking her. We have a suggestion that he was on the That's what you got? Let me put it this way. Even if... well, the thought certainly occurred to your minds, and I'm speaking to the cuck males out there now, so I guess there's a good possibility it might have crossed Ed's mind, but I don't know. You don't know. I'd say there's a pretty good possibility that that's the problem. That's all you got. And that's shit. Now you're fucking witch burning and attacking people for thought crimes that you haven't even determined. You see? This is a second point of injustice. And this is the worst of the DMs. This is the one that led to him being called by the P word. And I don't mean PISKER. Look, what are you talking about? This is the worst of it? And this is what convinced everybody? I don't think Ed was convinced. Except the shittiness of the people and the community he was surrounded by, and the hopelessness of crawling out of it in one piece. I thought he was wrong. I thought, to me it stood out as illogical. There was nothing condemning in it. Just some occasions where he had been disrespectful. And it was also suggested that when he gave the number, he was basically saying, it was suggested that the one woman who was of age that, maybe if she did it sexual favors for him, she might get somewhere. But that isn't even clear. It just seems like a disrespectful brush off, like, stop bugging me. You're not going to get anything from me any more than what you have. Like, get out of here. You're hanging off me. I'm too busy for this shit, for one thing. It's not about who do I think I am, and it's not about your agenda to cut me down to size and ruin me behind my back with your bullshit and your little black broken heart. You have issues, ladies. And a lot of people would see you as pieces of shit. for what you've done. But then again, I don't know. I can only go by all the information that was granted to us, the public to sift over. But people aren't even sifting it over. So one jackass grind Ed into the dirt. Quite a popular poster, I might add. And after his death, go in the the other direction. Oh, the pity, and accusing everyone else. And about 8 months later, turn around while he was talking about the Neil Gaiman situation and dig up Ed Pisker's situation and talk about how those things still stand. These were his words. Quote me on this. These things still stand. And I thought, what kind of fucking geek assholes are these? No, they don't. They didn't stand at the time. But no one took the particular time and energy to find it out, to look through it, to see if there was anything really incriminating there. There was no case. There was just a bad rap. Now, the shit with Neil Gaiman, I don't know. I haven't investigated at all. Quite frankly, I didn't feel affected by it, but I know a lot of people were because of his popularity and his talent and all of that. But I remember giggling to myself thinking about, what's this bathtub thing? Oh, that was lots of fun. Ooh. And I mentioned this about the comic book store cockroaches in the corner and how they're so weirded out when the topic of sex comes. Like there's a part of them that never grows up. They never quite feel comfortable with. I don't know what it has to do with. It could be abuse issues when they're whatever. Don't want to make judgments, but again, it was right there, and it cropped up, and the guy was talking about, something that had occurred in the bathtub with Gaiman and his girlfriend, and I thought, well, fucking, or this actually, was she the girlfriend, or they had it wasn't a liaison. They, something had occurred. Nothing extreme, right? Something to do with cuddling or something like that. And I'm thinking, first of all, I don't fucking care about that. And number two, I'm thinking, he was talking, the guy, the poster was talking about what a pervert this guy was. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you mean you've never taken a shower with your girlfriend? Or been in a bathtub with your girlfriend? That's not that weird. What are you talking about? Man, you're uptight. But I didn't want to go there either, right? Because they're having a witch burner for Mr. Bubbles or whatever. Like, what the fuck? And then I remember hearing that, and I'm thinking, I don't want to. And it was getting, everyone was getting on the bandwagon again. And I'm like, didn't they learn anything from Ed Pisker? And I'm thinking, I'm not really interested. So I started tuning out. And once in a while, I'd come back and hit a channel and see what they had to say. And, it's getting worse for Neil Gaiman. And all the Me Too shit came out. And I don't know if they ever really found anything that damning, but people started pulling the plug on them. What do you call it? Financially, right? And that's the pattern. What can you do? It's not their job to solve the problems of the world and socially correct everybody if they're not willing to investigate the case. But I remember thinking, going, wait a minute, wait. Now, what happened in this bathtub? I'm thinking, now, who took their clothes off? Were their clothes taken off for them? I don't remember hearing anything like there's the whole accountability issue too, and I don't want to apply it to any particular case, and not even this one, but I'll say this. There is an accountability issue that crops up a lot in these cases. I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of people out there that consider themselves quite intelligent, but if you get caught in a situation like that where 6 months to 2 years later, you wake up and you say, hey, wait a minute. Was that really the right thing to do? I don't know how I feel. Then you're an idiot. I don't care what you have to say at that point. You got yourself into idiotic situation because you were not paying attention, you were not careful, and you later were not accountable for your own actions or decisions. Fuck you! Now you want to destroy this guy's career, and they have. That guy, like, I mean, I guess he's done. I think he felt like he needed to make a statement. I haven't looked into it. I never looked back on that one because I'm thinking, man, what a shit show. Again, feeling kind of like-minded with Pisker, thinking, yeah, it's kind of hopeless. I don't know what the case is with them, but you know, as far as the P word goes, people that are actually engaged in that, I have no mercy in that regard. It has devastated a lot of people. I've had the chance to know in my own life, and I see what it does to families and some kids, and what it does to them even when they become adults. It's just horrible. But we're not talking about that here. And that was my deepest resentment, that people were trying to attach that kind of labeling, and who knows who, to Ed Pisker and his situation there. It's ridiculous. Nothing happened. It wasn't a pursuit. It was an open offer. And I don't think that young lady used it as a dagger. I think someone else used it as a dagger when they found out. Some of the older ladies. It doesn't matter. It's all... But what I would ask is that look, there's corruption everywhere now, more than ever. But this is the reason, why when it comes to things like this, courts of law, cross-examinations, investigation of... Remember, evidence is not proof. Evidence are the things that the attorneys bring to the table to sift over, to find proof. And look, never mind the fact that there's not just reasonable doubt here. It's beyond that. But ultimately, Ed decided not to hang around and see what he could have presented. I think there was enough there to say, you can't condemn me of this. This is bullshit. And I wished that he, in a different scenario. No, the same scenario just came out just roaring back at them. Telling them what he thought. And he did in the note, but it was an exit note, so it didn't warrant rage, right? But just to put them in their place and saying, you got nothing on this. This is ridiculous. Here's why I think you were doing these things. And you suck, basically. You still suck, and some of you suck as an artist still. Oh, but you're floating around socially. Some people are licking your ass, right? So the same bad things don't happen. I do. See, but then you get someone like me who doesn't give a fuck about likes and subscribes and all that shit. Things can happen for a reason. And, I think more of us should make the decision to make sure that they do. It was wrong. Throughout this whole thing, it wasn't a picture of Ed Pisker. It was more a picture of people in general. And I'll never forget that comment that was made to me that really got me thinking. And said, it's just that, he was explaining, it sounded like a plea. Again, paraphrasing, he said something like, it's just that people do not process information properly anymore. And, absolutely goddamn right. They go on the buzz. They get on the bandwagon. And we're talking about generations of followers is the word. That's the key. And it's a horrible circumstance. And I think in a situation like that, where people come out to contribute you know, through their opinions, where they stand on this. They're just, a lot of times, they're just basically trying to separate themselves from an issue as some sort of virtue signal. And some of them are just plain fucking scum. And that is what surfaced last year when Ed had taken his own life. And I can't imagine how that young lady is feeling now. Oh, should I have said this? What was my intent? I don't care about the other ones that made their intent very clear. And they had no right to do that. There was no proof or evidence damning in that capacity to do that. But it didn't matter. That's what I think that's what Ed recognized at the time. It didn't matter. The way he saw it, well, like, you know, if this is what they're saying, that's how it is. Because that was his community at the time, right? I mean, he wrote a little bit about that. But he talked about it more. But most of the time, he was too busy fucking working to lift his head. You know? He'd maybe respond to a derogatory comment indirectly, but he wouldn't let it interfere with his channel and his work. That was the point. What do you think those people were doing while he was working? Exactly. Pieces of shit. However, in the end, I just want to extend my condolences towards the Pisker family. And tell them a lot of people felt the pain they did, and that they're supportive, and they miss Ed too. It was a loss, and some of the things that Ed was bringing to the table just aren't, I can't see them being replaced by too many individuals out there concerning his love of the history and the love of the craft and technique, and just he knew who he was, you know, and he stayed on that track, and I respect him for it. And Ed, if you're out there and you can hear this, I just want to say that your impact is kind of, it can't be replaced. And it's hard to express exactly what that energy meant to so many people. And I got to tell you, I wasn't always happy about this, and there were times where I was quite angry at you. Couldn't believe that you did it. I was thinking, oh no, they're not worth it. Just ride this out the next couple weeks. You'll see as things come to surface, there'll be enough time for people to debate this. But what? Once you died, people figured they shouldn't have debated it? That's wrong. I felt that was wrong. But I want you to know, homeboy, I cried the first time I had, like, in years. I'm like, what is this? I don't even know this individual. I think it was a loss, a tragic, and it paints a picture. But I always felt that if we could really look at things in the aftermath and look and see what was actually there and what wasn't there, and that it was just a bunch of suspicion from a lot of people that were probably ghouls themselves. That's the energy I feel from some of these pieces of. But I thought we could learn from it. But I think the patterns will still remain. And there's just too many damn people now. The amount of detraction or the amount of support can never be underestimated. And that, I don't know, perhaps when we learn about ourselves as a communicating entity species and understand our capacity. It's not so much about what we see. This is the other problem. It's not so much about what we say or do that may lead to someone's death. It's not about that. We need to be smarter. We need to be better. And just start using our heads instead of our emotions, and instead of we're protecting our comfort zones. You know? I think a lot of us should learn to be a little bit more morally courageous. You fuckers know who you are. And I hope you're proud of yourselves. Because I'm certainly proud of Ed.